Well, the Moses story is so huge, and we're at Exodus 14. I thought that we can read Exodus 14, but I thought maybe we could just not read, but kind of walk through starting at Exodus 1 so we see how we got there. Just to maybe kind of recap some of the big and major events.
Where is that?
So I'll just do a minor summary as we're moving along, and then we'll focus on Exodus 14 and 15. So Exodus 1, as I mentioned, a new Pharaoh arises, and he's threatened by the Hebrew people, and so puts them into slavery, and then also wants the midwives to kill the baby boys while they're born. And then you have these two midwife heroes, Puah and Shiphrah, who refuse to do that. It's such a beautiful example of two powerless women who suddenly use the power they have in a nonviolent way to go against empire. And all they do is just lie and say, these women are too strong. Those babies just come out and we're not even there. But because of that, of course, Moses is born, and Miriam, the older sister, watches him as he goes down the river, and the princess of Pharaoh sees him. So it's all of these women colluding against the violence of the empire in nonviolent ways. It's just such a gorgeous story. And then when Moses is older, he kills a soldier and he becomes afraid, so he flees out in the wilderness, gets married, is there for a while. In chapter 3, he has this experience of the burning bush where God approaches him and calls him and gives him this name, Yahweh, I am that I am. I'm the one who is. It's a very difficult to translate word because it's just like being. I am life. I am the source of all that exists. I was, I am, will be. All of that, right? You can't just say this is the only way to interpret it. So then Moses goes back, and with his brother Aaron, I find it ironic because Aaron is supposed to be there to speak for Moses, but Moses talks the whole time.
Great spokesman.
And he goes up to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh thinks you're ridiculous, and then we start to have the plagues. So we have 10 plagues, of course, the last one being the angel of death that is going to come through. And what's interesting is these plagues affect everybody. They don't just affect Pharaoh, they affect all the Egyptians. They could potentially even affect the Israelites. And so even the last plague, the reason why there's the Passover with the blood on the door was so that the angel of death does not affect them. And so there's this Passover meal to commemorate the first of its kind, which is celebrated practically unceasing since then. So what it's become now, the Seder meal, the roots of it go back over 3,000 years, which is kind of amazing. So then Pharaoh with the death of his son says, okay, you win, sends them out. The people give the Israelites all of their jewelry as they walk out, because that's what you do when someone beats you. You give them all your jewelry. And then God comes as a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of cloud by fire at night and leads them out. And then that's where we are in chapter 14, where they are out, and then Pharaoh decides to change his mind. So does somebody want to read this one for us?
I can read.
Okay.
Because I've been out for the last couple of weeks.
Sure.
Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and camp in front of... Oh my goodness.
Best shot.
Really? Best shot?
No, I just said give it your best shot.
Oh, okay. Pi Hahiroth.
Perfect.
Between Migdol and the sea. In front of Baal Zephon, you shall camp opposite it, by the sea. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are wandering aimlessly in the land. In the wilderness, or the wilderness has closed in on them. I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, so that I will gain glory for myself over Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the minds of Pharaoh and his officials were changed towards the people. And they said, "What have we done, letting Israel leave our service?" So he had his chariot made ready, and took his army with him. He took 600 picked chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, with officers all over them, or all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the Israelites, who were going out boldly. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, his chariot drivers and his army. They overtook them and camped by the sea, by Pihahiroth, in front of Baal Zephon. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites looked back, and there were the Egyptians advancing on them. In great fear, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Is it not the very thing we told you in Egypt? Let us alone and let us serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better to us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall only have to keep still." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. But you lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the Israelites may go into the sea on dry ground. Then I will harden the heart of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will gain glory for myself over Pharaoh and his army, his chariots, and his chariot drivers. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gained glory for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his chariot drivers." The angel of God who was going before the Israelite army moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and took its place behind them. It came between the army of Egypt and the army of Israel. And so the cloud was there with the darkness, and it lit up the night. One did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove back the sea by a strong east wind all night, and it turned the sea into dry land. And the waters were divided. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went into the sea after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and chariot drivers. At the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and cloud looked down upon the Egyptian army and threw the Egyptian army into panic, as he clogged their chariot wheels so that they did not turn, or they turned with difficulty. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and the chariot drivers." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at dawn the sea returned to its normal depth, and the Egyptians fled before it. The Lord tossed the Egyptians into the sea. The water returned and covered the chariots and the chariot drivers. The entire army of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. But the Israelites walked on dry ground through the sea, the water forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great work the Lord did against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and his servant Moses.
Okay.
So outside of this account in the Bible, I mean, this is a pretty significant event, especially, I mean, was Pharaoh also chasing after them? Or, I mean, it sounded like at the beginning, but towards the end, they were mostly talking about the army and the chariots and such. Did the Pharaoh die in this event? And is this recorded elsewhere outside of the Bible?
I do not think that Pharaoh died. I think he sent in the army and was removed from that. That's one of the things that people find a little questionable about some of the narrative, especially with the huge numbers. There's parts that say like in 10,000 of this tribe and 10,000 of this tribe, and there's a lot of archaeologists and historians that said a mass migration of that number would have been recorded. It doesn't mean it didn't happen, but the numbers might have been a little bit more, a little bit smaller, more modest of a number. Parts of this story may be amplified in a much grander scale in the retelling over time, because at the end of the day, it's not about how literal any of these stories are. It's the significance that it holds in their mind about what God did for them, who they are to God, and what God is to them. So we take all of this with a grain of salt. I remember in seminary, this says the Red Sea. I don't know if any of you have maps. The Red Sea is huge. It's massive, and to walk across it as if it was parted would have taken an extremely long time. And in the Hebrew, the Red Sea and the Reed Sea are virtually the same word. And the Reed Sea is much smaller and containable, and something one could walk across and may even not need to part significantly, or if the waters had recessed, you could walk across it. So it's one of those things that and that kind of made some people upset, because they're like, no, I thought it was supposed to be, did any of you see the Charlton Heston?
Yes.
Yeah.
A million times.
God. Super dramatic, yes.
Joshua, all this really dramatic. So you get this impression in this head of Moses in this massive body of water. And also, I don't know. What?
A little fish in it and everything.
Yeah. If you notice, in the movie, it all happens within about 15 minutes, right? Did you notice that this happened over the course of an entire night?
Day and night, with the cloud, and then changing the fire, keep it separate. And I remember when I was in high school, I was high school age, seeing a show that talked a little bit about this and said there's a little part of, I forget if it said it maybe it been the Reed Sea, but right near the corner of the sea, that there's a little shallower part of the sea, such that during low tide, if the winds were going in the right direction, it could cause some of that to open up.
Which brings me to another point, which is, just because that happened, does that mean God didn't do it? Sometimes I think people can be like, no, if God did it, it would be this obvious, massive sea parting with, like in the movies, it would be like that. And so the thought that they went to sleep, and then when they woke up in the morning, it was easy enough for them to go, and so they all did that. But then maybe the winds changed or something shifted, so that when, and it could even be that the chariots were heavier or whatever it is,
or something.
It could be that whatever happened, the Israelites saw that as God working for them. They saw all of this as a manifestation of God's support and help when they didn't know what to do.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
All the other stuff doesn't even matter.
I mean, if we were a fly on the wall and watched some of these things happen, there was a woman who did an explanation for the 12 plagues. She said something about the first one is 10 plagues rather. The first one is the river of blood, and she said under certain conditions the water might turn red, and then all the fish would die, and then basically explained all of the plagues in order according to this particular phenomenon that happened, as well as how the darkness and all of that stuff could happen. Does that mean God didn't work through that?
I think that's a waste of time explaining all that stuff. I mean, the plagues are they had the plagues, whatever reason, and a cause and effect, and if the person, they, Israelites, are looking at that for the reason that it's supposed to be, that's the deal. Not to sit and waste all your time with majoring on the minors.
There we go.
Seems to be insane to me.
Well, God gave us intense curiosity.
Yes, he did.
And
Yes, he did.
Right.
This is where I argue with some of the people who say that religion and science cannot coexist, and it's like we are so curious. We are desperately trying to figure out the rules that God has set this universe out upon. But just because we're trying to figure out these rules and how things could work and how some of these miracles can take place, doesn't necessarily mean we're trying to throw it in the face of God. It's just, how'd you do that?
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah. No, I hear you there.
It's like a kid looking at his father building something and going, how'd that thing hold that together? What's this glue stuff? How's that work?
Another thing about this is that perspective of do you see God in all things or do you see God in nothing? Just because you can explain it, does that mean God wasn't there? And that's also the God of the gaps theory, which a lot of theologians have said that the more science explains the world, the less people believe God did it. And so God is only present in the gaps of that which we do not understand. And so I think where religion and science can come together is absolutely can when you realize that God works through things, through science, through the language of that, it doesn't just have to be that which we can't explain that is the presence of God. Because then that would mean that the more and the more we understand and the smarter we get and the more we can reason and figure science out, the more God seems to disappear, which of course some people believe. That's where a lot of people have dropped their faith is they're like, oh, I thought this was a miracle, but now I understand it in this way, so I guess God's not real.
I think one of the most beautiful
go ahead.
one of the most beautiful examples I think was Johann Kepler, who was obsessed. One of the things he was obsessed with was figuring out how the motions of the planets worked, and he's the one who resolved the niggling question of how heliocentrism worked and being able to predict the motion of the planets accurately with the sun being in the middle, figuring out that it's because the orbits aren't circular, they're elliptical.
Hypatia did too.
She did too,
Yeah.
but he was able to work out the math for it.
Yeah, okay.
And make it accurately predictable.
Yes.
The trick is that they move a little bit faster when they're close to the sun, a little slower when they're further away. That's what makes the math work out. And for him, this didn't make it less divine, knowing that. The church had been so against scientific inquiry into this because they were like, this reveals things about God, and that could drive people away from God. But there was serious worry about that. But for him, that didn't. It was like, it just made it more beautiful and more amazing. He just thought it was just so beautiful and wonderful. And isn't the world beautiful?
And so many of our astronauts have come back from orbit with feeling they've had religious experiences and seeing.
Well, that too, but he just liked math.
Yeah,
He thought math was beautiful.
So when they were talking about, you're talking about the sea parting, and it could have been because of this, because the wind's a certain way or more shallow deal. But all this that happened at that particular time, there's so many variables, and in our life, when you see you're called to help somebody out, and when you met that person, everything, all this stuff together, God used you. There's a hand of God there at that place. That's where you see these things. Where God moves you around, just as you were talking about the chess game.
Yeah.
Today, I think, and so science is great, perfect. Yeah. But God puts all things together in a timely, uses a timely way, and He puts your soul in the right time to accept that, which is a huge part of it too,
Mm-hmm.
I believe.
Any thoughts, Ben?
I don't know, not really. I mean, this is the
No, I
story you
don't
kind
buy
of
it
grown
either.
up with, like,
Yeah,
forever.
that's
And
true.
it's
This is
like
true.
that iconic story of, you know, the harrowing escape. And yeah, I mean, you kind of go, oh, well, that's amazing. Like, if that happened today, it'd be like incontrovertible, you know. But you kind of have to like water it down a little bit to kind of go, okay, if this could happen in real life, then yeah, it just raises the question: well, did God do it? Did he? What does that mean? It'd just be one of those things where it'd be, if this somehow happened today, it'd be like, oh my goodness, you know, like an asteroid flying towards Earth and just out of nowhere, like, oh, it just moved. Like, well, how does that, you know, like,
Yeah.
there's no other explanation.
Yeah.
And it'd be like observed by, you know, millions of people. Like, oh, this absolutely happened. And there's no way to explain it other than like some miraculous act that is outside of our, and everyone's like, oh my goodness.
And even if it was just the numbers, where they be tens of thousands or just a few thousand people happening today, yeah, they'd all be taking videos and TikToking and YouTubing things as they're going through, and we'd have video proof. Well, okay, then everyone would say, well, so many of these would be photoshopped or whatever, but it's just.
Yeah.
They recorded it as best they could with what they had through their retelling of the story by mouth, and so yeah, the tribes and the fish got bigger and bigger, maybe, but I mean the truth is still they got away.
I mean, the Passover thing is interesting because, you know, if every year for 3,000 years it's something people still do, it's like, well, that didn't just happen for no
Right,
reason.
didn't
It's
come
like,
out of nowhere.
what, you know, to be a fly on the wall, I'd be like, what was that? Like, did it happen like they said it? Like, if that's true, like, I mean, that's
Something
still
started
like,
as custom.
you know, that's got like voltage. It's got a continuity through time. It's like that didn't just happen out of nowhere. It's like, yeah, no, that something happened to make them do that, and it was a big deal because they still do it. So it's like they said, it's not, we're just gonna leave that to the side. It's like something happened.
Something happened where they commemorate this event of leaving an oppressive situation and being saved by God. And this, literally the word Passover means an angel of death passed over us, and there's lamb's blood on the door. Like, so
Yeah.
there was something that happened that just continued to be celebrated year after year, and just continued. I mean, Jesus celebrated it. So
Yeah.
there was this, it's interesting. I do enjoy reading historical, when different archaeologists or people will try to reconstruct things from a historical point of view, and they can't all agree because there's just not tons of written down stuff at that time. And what we have written down was written down at least 500 years after it actually happened. So sometimes the fish got bigger or whatever, but something happened that was still so amazing to the people, and that unified them to say, we are this people, we are these 12 tribes, and this is our story. And really, like, as though the story begins with Abraham, in some ways it begins with this event, with Moses and the Exodus, because that's when they really started to form the priesthood. They had the 10 Commandments, and thus the tabernacle and the tent, and really their sense of worship and as identity as a people begins here. So
I don't like that God drowned all of the Egyptians, including the horses and all of these innocent beings. Rubs me the wrong way.
Well, killing the firstborn for us the wrong way too.
Yep.
I think a lot of that, it's got to be the fish story, I mean, the Egyptians were actually really obsessive record keepers during this time period, yet there's absolutely no trace of this whatsoever. So I think to the Egyptians, this probably wasn't that big a deal.
Of course,
So,
they also had with the Pharaoh being, sometimes when a Pharaoh gets, or a king in general gets slapped in the face with something, sometimes they
there would
gloss
still
over.
be records I mean,
Oh, yeah, true. All the deaths.
they had a Pharaoh Akhenaten who was a heretic, and they tried to erase his successor tried to erase him in their still record. I mean, if they couldn't erase that, no, there would be some trace. So this must have been a smaller event than is portrayed here. So the story definitely grew,
Okay.
which stories tend to do. So that's not too surprising. I mean, it's definitely very, very important to the Hebrews.
It was important to the Hebrews.
Yes.
And that's what matters, right?
Yeah.
Like, so from the Egyptian point of view, it was not maybe important enough to record. But
Because a
from
bunch
the
of
Hebrew,
slaves ran away.
yes.
And probably they tried to chase them down because they didn't want them to get away. Because, hey, come back here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there
And-
probably were a lot of plagues that happened because plagues did happen. And they probably entered the story as signs and portents.
And to your point, when you're interpreting the events that had happened as God doing this for you, and in that perspective of, I don't know how much they had a perspective of like the being humane to animals.
Oh, I
you
know.
and
I
stuff
know
like
they didn't
that.
care about that then.
Yeah, and I mean, women were whatever property too, and God defeating your. I mean, there's some pretty rough stuff that they believe God asked of them, but in reality, they were recording their history and looking back and seeing God in the actions of what happened to them, and they can be wrong. And we know one of the ways they can be wrong is the stories of Jonah and Job contradict the perspectives that are predominant throughout the Old Testament. Job contradicts the theology that God gives you what you deserve in this lifetime. If your bad things are happening, you deserved it. If good things are happening, you deserved it. Job questions that theology. The book of Jonah questions very directly that God doesn't care about your adversaries, that God only cares about the chosen people. And that's a very powerful statement. It's just one book. And so you read this and you're like, well, what would the book of Jonah say about this? And even the book of Jonah ends with God talking to Jonah and saying, you're so upset about this little bush that I created in one day. Why can't I be upset about all of the men, women, and animals in Nineveh? Mentions the animals many times because they put sackcloth on the animals too and they're repenting. I love it. So it's this awareness of like, it's not just about you, the chosen people, the chosen people.
Right, which is probably why it rubs me the wrong way, because I don't think God would have just killed all of these innocent people.
Yeah.
No.
Not that they were all innocent, but yeah.
Well, I know exaggeration for effect was very much a thing done in storytelling too.
Sure.
It's deliberate, and it was expected, so people would know that the story was told larger than it really happened.
Yeah. Well, that's what makes an interesting story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You don't want to get up and be like, well, let me tell you just the real bare bones, oh, why did we get around the campfire for this story? This is boring. This doesn't entertain us.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, chapter 15 is the Song of Moses, and then at the very end, they decide Miriam's going to just copy her brother. I raised question to that. I have a thought, but does someone want to read 15
I can read it.
for us?
Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my might, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him. My father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he cast into the sea. His picked officers were sunk in the Red Sea. The floods covered them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shattered the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you overthrew your adversaries. You sent out your fury. It consumed them like stubble. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The floods stood up in a heap. The deeps congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil, my desire shall have its fill of them. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. You blew with your wind, the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, doing wonders? You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your steadfast love you led the people whom you redeemed. You guide them by your strength to your holy abode. The peoples heard, they trembled. Pangs seized the inhabitants of Philistia. Then the chiefs of Edom were dismayed. Trembling seized the leaders of Moab. All the inhabitants of Canaan melted away. Terror and dread fell upon them. By the might of your arm they became still as a stone, until your people, O Lord, passed by, until the people whom you acquired passed by. You brought them in and planted them on the mountain of your own possession, the place, O Lord, that you made your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, that your hands have established. The Lord will reign forever and ever. When the horses of Pharaoh with his chariots and his chariot drivers went into the sea, the Lord brought back the waters of the sea upon them, but the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. Then the prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing. And Miriam sang to them, Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. Then Moses ordered Israel to set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. That is why it was called Marah. And the people complained against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? He cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. Then the Lord made for them a statute and an ordinance there, and there he put them to the test. He said, If you will listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, and give heed to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will not bring upon you any of the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the water.
So I found it interesting that you have Moses and the Israelites sing this song, and then Miriam mimics the first two. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, why they would just mimic the song. And I thought, what's more likely, that they amplified the status of a woman or that they diminished? And so my thought is it was probably, and even my note in here says, it's probable that Miriam and the women initiated the song, and then it was given to Moses with a little bit of credit to her at the end. That makes more sense over time than the other, but that's just my thought.
And the backing vocals.
Yeah, backing vocals. Yeah,
What'd you say?
And backing vocals.
yeah.
Miriam and the women.
Yeah, diminished from songwriter and lead singer to backup vocals, yeah. There's something interesting in the song here, too, because in verse 15, it talks about, 14 and 15 talks about all of these surrounding peoples who heard about what happened and trembled. And my notes like, it kind of is contradicted by what happens later. No one actually seems to be trembling at Israel, which I think is a funny statement. Again, this is a song that may have built over time and been added to in a way that was, sometimes that happens, not to say that prophecy is not a thing, but sometimes you'll have people who will talk about things that clearly had to have been put in there later. Like when Solomon's dedicating the first temple, he just randomly says, and should there ever be a time in the future in which this temple is destroyed, we know that God is with you wherever you go. And I'm like, okay.
Totally something you say when you're building a...
Yeah, exactly. It's like very probably put into his mouth later when the temple was destroyed, as a way to give assurance to the people. But anyway.
Evidence of the editorial process.
Yep.
I suppose the whole Bible is an anthology, but I suppose each of these books are also anthologies too.
Yeah.
Because they're combinations of stories that sort of glob together.
And wood that can make the bitter water of Mara sweet. I don't know. Maybe it was some cinnamon sticks. maybe the Mara water was a little bitter from tannins from
I think
tea trees.
I think in this context it means turning salt water to fresh water. That's what I always thought.
In any case, it made the water potable anyway. Or,
And that's the first of a series that we see if we keep reading in Exodus of they face an obstacle and the people complain. They complain to Moses, and then Moses goes to God, and then God fixes it. And it's just this over and over and over again. And the people continually start to get into this, why are we here in the desert? You brought us here to starve, to die, to whatever it is, And they glorify the past. They're like, in Egypt we had leeks, and we had this, and we had that. Well, maybe they did, but in the story earlier, it sure seemed like they had nothing. Like they were even denied wheat for their bread and had to ground it themselves. Like it sounded awful. So, which is true, right? They're just the way we remember things can really change depending on. Yeah.
it really does sound like a long car ride with the kids.
Great.
Are we there yet?
I'm hungry.
I didn't want to come anyway.
Yeah.
The snacks we brought aren't any good.
That's great.
And it's funny too that
Let's go bathroom. No, I have to go to the bathroom. What? We just passed the.
God and Moses seem to be like the parents at times, where like Moses is like, or God, sometimes God's like your people, and Moses is like actually your people. You know?
Reminds me of that scene from The Lion King. Your son is awake,
Your
dear.
son, exactly. Yeah, they're just
Classic.
like, yep. And I think that there's something.
Your kid now.
It's such a great metaphor for humanity in general.
Yes. Yeah.
Is we're all in the wilderness. Life is a wilderness where we're learning lessons of trust, and we cannot see the big picture, and we get caught up in little things and complain and forget the things of the past where God was there for us. And yeah,
What are you going to do for me today?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
God is a vending machine.
Yeah.
yep. ATM. I put in the right code, then I get out exactly what I want.
Got this unhealthy cycle of. It's bad. I complain. God fix it.
Yep.
And not looking back and seeing where the things that he's done so we can trust in going that forward. Just forgetting that. And all of a sudden, just as they said, how bizarre. Well, you brought us this far just for this? Yeah, all the time.
Or even appreciation for what they've done. I mean, they've been walking. That takes work.
Yeah. So if you think of the promised land as being, theoretically, we know it wasn't, but for them, they were thinking of it. That's the place with milk and honey. That's the place where we have everything, where we can settle down and have peace. And so we have in our mind a promised land where we want humanity to be, where we want ourselves to be. And one of the reasons why it took 40 years is because they weren't emotionally ready for the promised land. And that was a time of them learning and growing and learning to trust God and having this powerful experience. So in a lot of ways, you can think of our lifetime as being like the wilderness. We think about the promised land. Oh, heaven, we'll be with God and we'll just all hold hands. But maybe we're not ready for heaven. Maybe we have to go through the aches and pains of life before we get to be mature enough to actually appreciate heaven. And I find that really interesting. I know this is a slight divergence, but what if heaven is that when you die, the person you knew who you hated the most was the one greeting you at the gates of heaven? And if you could walk into heaven with them, it truly was heaven. Or when you were at the gates and you looked in and you saw everybody eating, You saw all the people who you thought surely were going to hell in a handbasket. And yet there they were, putting up a seat for you. Not to say that they hadn't changed. That's not to say, but we have sometimes in our mind, you know, we need to have an enemy, or we need to have someone that we feel we're better than, that we deserve this more than. It's like the elder son. Did he go into the party or not? Did he have to stay out and just be better than his brother? Or could he let that go and go into the party and appreciate that his brother was alive? So I sort of feel like in a lot of ways this narrative and just watching how annoying the people are in the wilderness is a really powerful mirror to how childish humanity can be. And we just see it every day. We see just the things that people say and talk about, and
In ourselves, what we
and
did.
in ourselves.
My
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah.
I can do it so many times too. It really wiffle bats us with a message of, look, no matter how stupidly annoying people are, God doesn't give up on them.
Can you imagine, you know, you see how annoyed you are with somebody else. Can you just imagine how annoyed God is with myself?
And He doesn't give up on you.
I know. And we don't feel that He's going to give up on us. Why should we feel that, you know, other people should be given up on?
Yeah, I mean, the Bible really reminds us time and time again that God is like a parent, dealing with unruly children, and as much as these kids can turn their backs on the parents and or take their parents for granted, or even say things against their parents or do things against their parents. I mean, the parent is still yearning for the kids to come back and come around and learn their lessons, and that they're still ready to hold their hands when they come back.
Yeah.
And to your point, no one really goes through life wanting to, few people go through life wanting to be the bad guy. They're doing the things they do typically for what they think is the best for their goals anyway. And but from others' perspectives, or looking back in history, yeah, it looks like what they did was pretty darn bad at the time, but everyone's got their own lens.
Yeah.
I follow a lot of just different people on Twitter just to get a wide view of opinions, and it's gotten pretty horrible like the last month or so.
I can
Just a
imagine.
total cesspool of
Yeah.
awfulness, and so like that whole like eating the dogs, cats thing, like
Oh my
Oh,
God.
that was like
great.
that was on Twitter like a few days before. So when he said that, it wasn't coming out of nowhere. It's like this is
Yeah.
part of like the cesspool of like all these people. And like at one point, someone responded to like, oh, you know, on one hand they'll be like, get these people out of here, and then on the next they're like, we love freedom, yay! And it's like, you know, like one person's response was, you know, if you don't wish on other people like to have the same opportunities as you have, you don't love freedom, you love privilege.
Exactly.
It's
That's
like,
what I
oh, that
feel
makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
like when all these people are talking about that, like they have all their perspectives and they're saying these things, like that's been a helpful thing for me to think, like, you know, you're just in love with what you've got,
Yeah.
and you can't give it up, and I get that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they were
That's well put.
talking about the troves of immigrants when you come into into our country, and it's like, if you were in their shoes and you were in an area where the gangs were threatening the lives of your family,
Yeah.
for the sons to be conscripted into their gangs or the girls to be conscripted into their brothels, wouldn't you want to grab your kids and get them out,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
heaven forbid even send your kids on without you, hoping that they would find their way
Yeah.
to a promised land where someone might be able to take care of them and keep them out of this
And don't you think those people would be grateful and work really hard?
Yes.
Like,
Which
aren't
they
those the
do.
people you
They do.
want to?
Exactly.
They're the hardest workers
I
you'll
mean,
find.
that's exactly
what
the
it is.
thing. Is like
That's what it
the
is.
the lies that are told that these people coming are dangerous and that they're like taking from, is ignoring the actual stories of.
They're taking our jobs and they're lazy,
Right.
which I think is hilarious to hear.
Right.
But
Right. When you actually interview and talk to these people and what they've been through and the way that they're participating in society, those are the people you should be least afraid of. Right. It's just.
And you can find bad actors in these
Oh,
shows.
yeah.
Yes, you can find bad actors in
Everything.
because they're people.
Well,
the
not
hard
in the
paid-for
rich,
citizens.
not in the rich.
certainly
Take care
not.
of, you don't find anything bad there.
You can find
Yeah.
bad actors in there.
Yep.
I mean, wherever, and you can find good actors in, I mean, even among the
Yes,
rich.
yeah, absolutely.
And,
More good than bad, I think.
God, yes.
and so, I mean, it's all whom we want to highlight, but I mean, frankly, we need to look at the gifts that these people that he brought in, and yes, there's going to be a little bit of poison that comes with the gifts, and we've got a system to deal with that. We just need to improve this system for to help those who want to come in and who really want to become documented and to pay taxes and join our military or first responders and contribute.
So I'm gonna end with this thought that just came to me. So part of the maturity of the process is not only to stop pointing the finger and complaining, but to take responsibility for your own growth and maturity.
Yeah.
And I'm reading this book right now. It's a true story. It's 4 people from Hungary right before the Holocaust, and 3 of them were killed, and 1 of them survived.
Excuse me, I locked the back door.
Thank you. And they were gathering together, and in their faith, what was interesting is that when things were getting scarier and scarier and scarier, they never said a word or never talked about the Nazis or what was going on. The whole thing they were being instructed to do was to prepare themselves to be strong enough to have no fear. Their entire focus of their gathering and their time together was that they be showing another way. Didn't matter what they were, if they were doing anything. The doing was that they were being transformed into someone who had no fear in the face of what was happening. And that's so powerful because we spend so much time, and it's easy to do, pointing the finger at everything out there that can go wrong. And to me, there's nothing more mature than saying, regardless of what they're doing, I cannot be moved.
That's hard.
Yeah?
Yeah.